Aaron Schatz, the creator of the DVOA metric, just forever, like on the business card, on the tombstone, very, very, very far down the road, which is rad. Rad that you came up with a metric that has become so widely used.
Yeah, I would have called it something else if I had known that I was going to be doing it for 20 years. I would have called it something easier to remember if I knew this was going to be my career, yeah.
Have you workshopped that in retrospect? What would you have called it?
I don't know, efficiency rating, something simple.
Oh, there you go.
You're really being humble because we both were at the Big Data Bowl yesterday, and Mike Lopez did an excellent retrospective of how we've gotten to where we are in analytics, and Aaron has played such a big part in that. And so, you've played a big part in that. We're both watching the presentations. In 5 years, what do you think we're going to be talking about in terms of football analytics?
I mean, more of the next-gen stats, more of the tracking, more of what teams have done with the tracking, things that the Big Data Bowl has discovered to do with the tracking. Everything is, that is just such a fire hose of interesting data that's pointed at all 32 teams to just come up with the most interesting stuff they can come up with. I just think that is where breakthroughs are coming from.
It feels like, you're looking 5 years out. I'm looking 5 years back. It feels like the entire landscape has shifted.
Yeah, because it was only
It
was only 2016 that all teams that they started to really do the data, and only 2018 that they started giving it to all teams. The first couple years they did it, you only got your tracking. So you would look at a play and you wouldn't see the defenders. You would only see the 11 offensive players on your team. So it's only been a few years that every team has even had access to all that data.
But even just in the public sphere.
Yes.
Fans, maybe less so fans, and maybe let's just focus on people that are content creators or writers I think understand now, have a better understanding about efficiency metrics as opposed to counting stats. It feels very much like we're at a tipping point in terms of there being two different ways to look at it, and one is the new way and one feels very old-fashioned.
Yeah, definitely. I've been doing this for over 20 years, and from 2003 to 2018 was more alike than 2018 to now.
Crazy.
So many trends occurring over the past year, so many discussions. We're talking about the too high at the beginning of the year, then all of a sudden we're talking about building through the trenches at the end of the year. What are the trends that you think are going to stick?
I feel like building through the trenches is always the thing. The problem is there just aren't a lot of Jalen Carters.
Right.
It's not that people asked me after the season. We do our own podcast. I do a podcast with Mike Tanier called the Schatz and Tanier podcast from FTN Network, and someone asked me in the first one after the Super Bowl, do you think that the Eagles winning the Super Bowl will put a premium on interior pass rushers over edge rushers? And I said, I feel like people already knew there was a premium on interior pass rushers. There just aren't a lot of those guys.
Right.
And this happens to be a good draft for guys who could turn into those kinds of special interior Jalen Carter, Chris Jones level pass rushers, but I don't feel like that's a huge trend because we already knew those guys.
Aaron Donald
were really important. Yeah, Aaron Donald. Where have you been the last few years? We already knew that was really important. I think, if anything, maybe we learned that you don't necessarily have to have one of the top 4 quarterbacks in the league. That you can have a guy that some people question, but if you scheme right and you have other things, he can win for you. We knew that too because there was a year that Joe Flacco won the Super Bowl, and there was a year that Trent Dilfer won the Super Bowl, and Nick Foles won the Super Bowl. But I think maybe that's the takeaway. You don't have to have Mahomes.
Yeah, it feels like there's so many. This has always been the case, but it feels more clear now, I guess, that there's so many different ways that you could build as long as you build with the right pieces. I feel like it used to be with wide receiver in particular. I'm thinking that you wanted a very specifically defined wide receiver, and maybe you're looking for it's the best wide receiver, and who's the next best wide receiver, and who's the next best wide receiver after that, and you're just putting all of the skills into one bucket, whereas now you could go evaluate the specific wide receiver that you want within your offense, and a Puka Nacua, for instance, with his specific skill sets, if used properly within an offense, can be one of the best wide receivers in the NFL, even though he doesn't fit that traditional profile come draft time.
You have Jamar Chase, and you have like Amon-Ra St. Brown.
Exactly.
And they're both like very valuable, but they're very different.
Yeah.
Definitely. Let's talk about the running backs a little bit, because people invested in the running back position. Me and Lindsay still stand pretty staunchly on the fact that the Giants probably still made the right decision to leave Saquon Barkley. Now we're looking at the draft, and everyone's talking about, oh, this is a deep running back draft. Maybe 3 guys will go in the first round. I stand staunchly on the fact that it's just not as valuable position anymore. What's kind of the baseline of the argument from the analytical side that the running back, quote, revolution is still the same things we've been evaluating for years?
I mean, I think that the lesson we learned this year is not that running backs matter again. It's that running backs matter if you put them behind a good offensive line. I think it was like the first run of the NFC Championship game where Saquon Barkley is untouched for like 10 yards on the left side. Then he breaks 2 tackles and then he speeds away from everyone. If Saquon Barkley is on the Giants, that's a 1-yard loss. And he never has the opportunity to break tackles, and he never has the opportunity to speed away from everyone because the offensive line is so bad that he just gets tackled after a yard. So, like, you can't just, like, add Saquon Barkley or Derrick Henry to any offense and they suddenly flourish like they did this year. So I think that still ties into the idea that individual running backs are not as important as, or the difference between a great running back and an average running back is smaller than the difference between a great corner and an average corner, or a great wide receiver and an average wide receiver. The other important thing for people to remember is, I think analytics people saying running backs don't matter as much got turned into the running game doesn't matter as much, and those are two very different statements, because it was always about the offensive line is more important and the scheme is more important. It was never about the running game doesn't matter.
Well, yeah, it's about the ability of the running back, even if they are the very best running back in the league, to tilt your team's win-loss record in a way that's meaningful. And it just is small. And we have, and the examples that you just mentioned that everybody points to from this year, you can point 1 year back and say, what did Saquon Barkley do on the Giants?
Right.
He was just as good. He didn't get better this year.
And what did DeAndre Swift do on the Eagles?
Yeah.
Also had a career year.
Yeah.
So I want to get deeper into this because it's very interesting. We went to the Shrine in the Senior Bowl, and I played college football, and tackling is not a thing in practice anymore. And it really highlights the distributional differences in terms of expected points added of the pass versus the run. Because when a running back cannot break tackles, the play is dead fairly quickly. At what points are the running game, as you said, the slim distribution, the lack of deep negatives, but the lack of deep positives, better in terms of win probability than the passing game?
Well, short yardage. I mean, 3rd and 1, it's still, you're more likely to convert on with 3rd and 1 with a run than a pass. You know, and you still need to have the I don't know what the optimal run-pass ratio is, but you still need to have some run. Like, the optimal run-pass ratio is not 0. Right? So there still need to be some runs to prevent the other team from just sitting in dime all the time and, like, waiting for you to pass the ball. But I feel like we have not seen the team yet that was at an optimal run-pass ratio. Like, teams are still a little too run-heavy. Even the teams that we think of as very pass-heavy, like the Chiefs, are still probably a little too run-heavy.
We talked about the defensive tackles earlier and that not being a new thing in terms of like, oh, trend, go get yourself a good one. Are there any positions that you think with the changes have become more positionally valuable? Tight end, maybe?
I mean,
is that?
I think we know that just like wide receivers and corners, like as the knowledge has over the last 20 years has developed of the importance of the passing game, it just has really emphasized the importance of wide receivers and cornerbacks. That is right. Players on the interior and closer to the off-ball linebackers and running backs feel like a little less valuable than we used to think. Corners and wide receivers are like more valuable than we used to think. The interesting one this year is guard, especially because Kansas City just tagged Trey Smith.
Right.
So the question
so much
is,
money.
yes, but because it's an offensive line tag, not a guard tag.
Right.
So he's now going to be paid
like
more money than any other guard in history
Yeah.
off the tag. And there's a number of guards in free agency, and we're really going to see with like Tevin Jenkins and Will Fries, like how much are people willing to pay for guards? That's going to be an interesting to see where that gets valued.
That's another component that we've talked about before, but in our reaction to today's news about the fact that they're going to tag him, I don't think we've talked about. I think we thought that the depth of the free agent market was going to maybe drive his price down a little bit from where the expectation was. Like, yes, he's going to be the top guard on the market, but the fact that you could go get another one or another one or another one, and they're all pretty good, then does that drive down the need to actually sign him? So I think I'm, now that we're talking about it, even more surprised that they're tagging him than I originally was, which was also surprised.
Yeah, and you know, if you're going to give a guard $23 million, that's less money you can give for other things. So, you know, what happens to Nick Bolton?
Exactly. And so free agency versus the draft. We were talking about the draft. We're at the combine. It's the king event of all the hoopla, but there are true realities about the draft. What are the true realities of the draft?
I mean, the reason why the draft is so good is because you get players that are cost controlled. Right? It's not that they're all going to be good. I was joking with you guys before we started filming here and recording that half of all draft picks will be below average because that's how average works. And people can't expect you're going to get 7 contributors out of your 7 draft picks. Fans come out of the draft and are like, we're going to plug this guy in here, and we're going to plug this guy in here, and we're going to plug this guy in here. And the fact is that there's a lot of randomness to how much guys develop and how well they play as rookies, and you can't trust that they're all going to be valuable, and you can't trust that you can just plug them all into holes. But at the same time, because you're getting cost-controlled talent, it's much better for your long-term economic health than free agency is.
I have a lot of pet peeves about the way people talk about analytics that are not in the analytics community, one of which is the word analytics. And the way that it's so broadly used to assign blame or credit to a number of different things. Broadcasts of games, I wish that there was more effort made to understand why teams are doing what they're doing now. What are the things that make you want to pull your hair out?
I think the belief that we all live in spreadsheets and don't love football for loving football, I don't think people understand when they criticize me for, I mean, first of all, the reason why I talk about DVOA all the time is because that's my gig, right? Like I'm that guy, yeah. So that's my shtick, right? If I wanted to do Bill Simmons' shtick, I'd do something different with my life. The other thing is this belief that I live in my spreadsheets all the time. Like when Zach Bond made that diving interception of the Super Bowl, I swore loudly. I didn't go look in my spreadsheet to see what the likelihood was. I swore in the middle of the freaking auxiliary press box in the stadium in New Orleans because that play was a holy mackerel. I can't believe he just did that. And The fact is that analytics people, we may play with our spreadsheets during the week, but on Sunday we are screaming and yelling at our TVs just like everybody else.
It's funny you mentioned that because we all said, holy mackerel, love to play.
I didn't say mackerel.
I played linebacker, so I love the linebacker position. And then we went and checked the play out to see what the probability that he made the incompletion was. You're really honing in on something I love, which is analytics at its core, or the study of football, is really deciding what to observe and what to chart, which FTN has done a fantastic job of. And we're a proud partner of FTN as well. And so what is something that you wish you could observe that perhaps we will be able to do in the future?
Oh, that's an interesting question.
Yeah. Let's come up with a wish list, and then we'll make it.
I'll say that my biggest, the hardest thing for me is safeties. The hardest thing for me is judging safeties. From both a film perspective and a stats perspective, it's so hard to know what their assignment necessarily was. And then you judge them. Like, I have a stat that I keep, which is average yards per run tackle. And for defensive linemen, I think that's a good stat. For linebackers, it tells you more about the defensive linemen than it does necessarily about the linebackers. It's less a stat about how good players are and more a stat about how a defense is shaped. Yeah. And then for safeties, it's really not telling you anything about how good these guys are. It's really just telling you how the defense is shaped and who makes plays where. And so it's really hard to judge how good safeties really are. It's like the hardest position for me to judge. So, man, more information about safeties would be great.
Mine is running backs. Because I think, you can do missed tackles first. I feel like it's hard to nail down. Let's say
vision.
Let's say
the vision to hit the hole. There's no stat for that.
Well, so let's just even back up to Josh Jacobs, right? Josh Jacobs last year on the Raiders. He was coming off, not last year, the year before, 2023. So 2022, he was incredible. 2023 was not.
Yeah.
At all. There was no metric that you could pull up, not in rushing yards over expectation. No individual stat could help tell the story of the fact that he was still good, he was just in a bad offense, or the ways in which the environment impacted him. And so I think it's so hard because let's say he had never gone to the Packers. We never got to see him in a different environment. It's hard to gauge whether or not you're just, oh, well, maybe he got hurt, or maybe he fell off the cliff early, or we don't know in some cases. And so I have a really hard time with, just from a metric standpoint, evaluating running backs outside of their environment, not knowing what to attribute it to.
Yeah.
How do you go about that?
I think you look at missed tackles and you look at rush yards over expected and you look at what their blocking did. But yeah, you're right. Like Jacobs, even when you look at all those things, he looked pretty bad in 2023, and you never would have expected him to rebound in 2024. And I wonder if there was some kind of an injury.
Yeah.
Injuries are all in as well, and there's a bunch of great stuff going on in the sports science community on that. As a former player, I feel like injuries and staying healthy were the real key. What do you think the way that we have developed sports technology, the way that we have developed these metrics, what is the most applicable way or position that a player could improve their game by looking at their statistics or looking at their analytics?
That's an interesting question. I think that the statistics that will help players actually improve their games rather than just describe players and rate them are going to be things that are created with the tracking by the teams internally. The tracking that we on the outside don't necessarily have access to. I feel like that tracking is the best way to get an actual, where you sit down with a player the way in baseball they sit down with guys and talk about their launch angles. Like anything that's going to actually improve a player's game is probably going to come out of the tracking.
Aaron Schatz, thank you so much for your time. Tell people where they can find your work.
Aaron Schatz, again, you find me at ftnfantasy.com, specifically ftnfantasy.com/DVOA. You find a lot of my stuff on ESPN, usually ESPN Plus, and I'm on both Twitter and Blue Sky.
Yeah.
A Shots NFL on Twitter and aaronschatz.com on Blue Sky.
Good stuff. Thank you for your time.